Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Escape to the Quarter Bin. As always, I'm your host, Adrian Johnson, and I'm back with some brand new picks, as always. And there's one in particular that we'll start with that has been a staple from what I've seen in many a Quarter Bin. Xenon, Heavy Metal Warrior, by Masaomi Kanzaki. And I believe this is cover dated, okay. Does not say a month date, but according to this foreword here, it is dated 1987. And like I mentioned at the top, Xenon is something that is a staple, that has been a staple in many a quarter bin box. You know, I'm sure any of you guys out there, guys and gals out there who do a lot of quarter bin diving or discount bin diving, you know, you're very familiar with seeing like titles like Xenon in there, and most of them come from like Viz Comics. But Viz Comics and Eclipse Comics, they were publishing a lot of manga in the mid 80s. Eclipse had gotten a license through Viz to publish a lot of these manga titles, such as Xenon, but also stuff like Area 88 with, I believe, the fighter jets. You also had Mai the Psychic Girl, amongst many others, a handful, I should say. And, you know, the thing that attracted me about Xenon is this is right in my wheelhouse in terms of like, you know, manga. You know, I really love the aesthetic of like that late 70s, like mid 70s through the late 80s. That period for me, that's manga. That's like right in my wheelhouse, just in terms of the look of it, you know. Just all a lot of that stuff just really sings to me. You know what I'm saying? And another reason too is that, you know, it was fresh back then. You know, just in terms of, you know, a lot of that stuff being translated and coming over here in the form of like cartoons. You know, also that aesthetic bleeding over into animation, or as they called it back then, Japanimation. You know. Man, they were wild back then, you know, because, you know, they call it just Japanimation, you know, it really, you know, signifies that it's almost exotic, you know, when it's just animation like anything else, you know, from Europe, America, what have you, you know. But anyway, you know, you had stuff coming over here from Japan, you know, in the form of animation, you know, things that were readily accessible, like a Speed Racer, G-Force, Battle of the Planets, Gatchaman, as it was called in some quarters, Star Blazers, you know, things of that nature. So that whole aesthetic, you know, that, you know, a lot of the manga and the animation from Japan was bringing at that time, and you could find, you know, being published, you know, in comics, you know, and they were being translated over here, you know. So just this, like I mentioned, is something that I've always wanted to just check out. And so when I saw like a whole 9 issues of them, because I did end up getting like 9 in a row, like I mentioned. From what I gather from my reading of like these first couple of issues, this guy here is involved in a horrific plane crash, as you can see here. And then somehow through through the story, through the plot, he becomes a cyborg somehow. I read over this like pretty quickly, you know what I'm saying? Because I was just taking in most of the images because I really love this stuff so much. I love the aesthetic, you know, like I said, of like, you know, this mid 80s, you know, manga, you know, and I was just really taking that in. And the hatching and the pensmanship that you see in a lot of manga is great as well. you know, and definitely, you know, you can't leave out like the staples of like mid 80s manga, you know, legends such as, of course, Katsuhiro Otomo, you know, of obviously Akira fame and Domu. But you also have Masamune Shiro with Appleseed and Dominion, you know. Those things were, you know, very popular as well and beginning to come out around this time, or were already out, I should say, you know. And just, yeah, so apparently the main character here, he's involved in this horrific plane crash, but he's also a high school student, and I think he's lost his memory or something like that. So now he's just kind of like, you know, is a vagabond on the streets, but he's still being bullied by these by these high schoolers. And then somehow he starts getting like these cybernetic powers, you know, or he starts becoming a cyborg, you know. And just the the sound effects are crazy, you know. Check this out right here. Oh, good, gadoom, gadoom, you have to love the hyperbole of manga. That's the thing. Like, it's just unfiltered. You know what I'm saying? Like, they take it there. And then this is a article talking about high school life. I guess giving you a flavor of, you know, what these students are go through, you know, in their everyday life. And yeah, and then looks like a short biography of the creator, Masaomi Kanzaki. He was pretty much a young guy. He was 21 in 1985 when his debuted. So a couple years later, he's coming out with this, and so he would be 23 at the time. You know what I'm saying? And this stuff looks great for a 23-year-old. This is pretty cool. So, you know, I can't argue with that. Can't argue with the results. You know. But yeah, Xenon is something that, you know, if you find it in a quarter bins, which I'm sure you will, you know what I'm saying, a lot of this Viz comic stuff, you know, Eclipse comics, you know, type of deal, is readily available in many a quarter bin, you know. So if you come across a stack of them, you know, or even just one, you know, and it's in your wheelhouse, check it out. You know, this 80s manga is really cool, man. So, you know, give it a shot. Next up is Alpha Flight number 62. And this is cover dated September. It's cover dated September of 1988. And the reason I picked this up is it is an early example of the fledgling work of someone who's familiar to this program and to all of you, of course. One of my favorites, Mr. Jim Lee. And this cover is by Jim Lee, but inked by Al Milgram. And it is the last stand of the Purple Man. You can obviously tell by this font here that it's a takeoff on Purple Rain. You know, Prince's Purple Rain, of course. And yeah, and this is that. I'm only familiar with Alpha Flight, of course, from, you know, the early John Byrne, you know, years, you know, and of course, you know, through like maybe the first 12 issues, you know, when John Byrne was writing and drawing it, you know, because they're his creation, of course. But then after that, it just gets kind of weird to me. Like they trade out, you know, these characters. You know, there's still a version of Sasquatch there. There's a Vindicator who actually, you know, I believe by this time had already died, but his wife takes over. Heather takes over, and so Heather Hudson. So she takes over as Vindicator. And there's someone called I don't know if he's a cyborg or what, called Box. And the daughter of the Purple Man here, and I don't know what's going on with him. I don't know what the hell that is. But then the Purple Man himself, which I believe is an old Daredevil villain, and he's able to persuade people just by the power of persuasion to do his particular bidding, whatever he wants them to do, And what's interesting about this is that it is some of Jim Lee's, earlier work. Now, Alpha Flight was not his first work. His first work, if I am not mistaken, was a book from a company called Soulson Publications, and it was a Soulson Christmas special. After that, though, he was able to get work at Marvel, and one of the first titles that he started in on was Alpha Flight, and he did quite a few issues of Alpha Flight. Just getting his sea legs under the editorship of Carl Potts. And what's cool about this is that you can see that Lee is trying out a lot of different hats. He's coming in, he's kind of absorbing a lot of different, artists to kind of put the hats on to see what works, what fits. And what's unique is that you kind of see a lot of artists when they're coming in around this time, they're trying to do a Mike Mignola. It's very interesting. There's a lot of, Mignola is not readily, acknowledged as an influence for a lot of these guys, but he's there, and you see it here with Lee, with this kind of cross inking, you know what I'm saying? The line work that kind of fades to show it's foggy or something to that nature, and of course the ubiquitous statues, the shadowed statues that Mignola would put into his work as well, and just the overall mood also. So you see there that Lee is already taking on, some of Mignola's work. And then you can see here, even on the cover, you can see the beginnings of Lee's phrasing, if you will, in terms of the way that he depicts musculature and bodies. It's there, it's definitely coming along. And so, yeah, you can definitely see much, much more of the Mignola influence going on here. And then, just a few panels later, it really turns more into a superhero type of thing, just more or less hey, there's just any type of Marvel house style, if you will, of that time, but you can still kind of see okay, he is... And there's a bit of Art Adams, too. You can tell by this face here, this figure here on this statue. It's a bit of Art Adams going on, which makes sense because Mignola and Art Adams were, I believe they were good friends also and taking influence from one another. They're out in California, and as they were publishing, their influence seeped into the books, and then guys like, Lee and Liefeld and others, were starting to gain some of that influence as well. So it's pretty cool to see how quickly, though, Lee is coming along here. There's some good stuff going on here. Some good dynamic panels. Some good storytelling movement. And also I wonder if that's part of the influence of Carl Potts, whom Lee has acknowledged, was a big influence on him in terms of his storytelling and just really trying to get him to see hey, your panel to panel progression, can move like this. And I believe when Lee took over Punisher War Journal as a penciler, Potts was doing the layouts for Lee to follow along, and Punisher War Journal came after he was doing an Alpha Flight, and so Potts was doing some of the layouts for Lee for I think the first 6 or so issues, and then after that, Lee got the gist of it and was able to, do his thing from there and become, the top flight penciler, that we know, from then on. But this stuff here is just very solid, So I can see why, an editor would take a chance on Lee. Like he's just doing everything right, He's showing like people in everyday situations, backgrounds, crowds, clothing, just everything that you want. And he's giving you the good beginnings of storytelling. Just good movement as far as the storytelling. You know what I'm saying? And then you can see him bringing in the action shots too. So yeah, it's becoming apparent that Jim Lee's he's coming along. This young guy, Jim Lee, he might be going places, and who knew? Just within now think about it. This is in '87, and by '91, he's like on top of the industry, with the likes of Liefeld and McFarlane and the other guys who would soon leave Marvel to form Image. But who knew? Like within about 4 years, less than 4 years really, that he would be at the top of his game, on the biggest book in the industry, and then go on to even greater heights from there. But yeah, this is really solid work from Lee. Really, really good stuff. And I had always wanted to check out the Alpha Flight because you would see it in price guides. Just earliest work, by Jim Lee, Alpha Flight. But let me see what's going on, So yeah, so this really caught my eye. That's a cool pen. Look at this. This is pretty cool. Look at the movement on this. This is almost shades of from the first Terminator, where Cal Reese and Sarah Connor think that they've dispatched the Terminator, after the tractor trailer he was chasing them in blows up, and so they're there, and then just like the Terminator comes out the fire, the Purple Man comes out, almost to a T, in fact. Except he doesn't chase them through a factory like he does Reese and Sarah. Can't knock it. That's an Alpha Flight number 62, by the Neophyte, Jim Lee. All right, so the last book I have is actually 2 books. Deathmate Prologue and Deathmate Epilogue. The bookends, obviously, to the Deathmate crossover from 1993, and it ended in 1994, early 1994. All right, so I've actually, reviewed another issue of Deathmate on here before. In fact, I think I have it right here. On a previous episode, I had this in my stack of quarter bin finds. And this one is actually signed, as I gathered, by Dan Fraga. Take a look at that signature right there. There we go. Yep, this one is signed by Dan Fraga. And so I've reviewed Deathmate on here before, but I was able to find the 2 bookends, the prologue and the epilogue, in the quarter bins a little while ago. And I was like, all right, well, when I get a chance, I'm going to feature these because this is very interesting. Just with all the grief that the crossover got, perhaps in some ways rightfully so, just for its lateness. I mean, it was so late that it really became an industry joke. When I was reading like Wizard magazine, as I was getting into comics, Wizard would always joke about Deathmate being so late, or other books, in the industry around that time, coming out tardy, and, them saying, oh, that book is so late, it's almost as late as the next issue of Deathmate. But as I mentioned in that previous episode, and I will do so here again, Deathmate was a crossover between Image Comics and Valiant Comics, obviously, but in particular, it was between Valiant and Rob Liefeld's Extreme Studios. Extreme! And somehow Jim Lee got in the mix with his Homage Studios. So you have Valiant, Extreme, and Homage Studios all in the mix here. Yeah, and it's interesting. It's like something to consider is it seems like Liefeld and Lee were kind of linked that way. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it seemed like when Liefeld was able to get a certain deal in terms of with Deathmate and negotiate that, somehow Jim Lee would hear about it and get in on it as well. Same thing with, remember, Heroes Reborn. Liefeld and Lee were on that. They were the only two Image partners who agreed to come back to Marvel and take over those books. So again, you have Liefeld and Lee, and also you have to consider this as well. Liefeld and Lee also represented the big bulk of Image's output, in terms of the market share. I think per month, both of the companies were contributing at one time between 15 to 20 books, and they were putting out there in the market. So where went Liefeld and Lee, so went Image for a time anyways. The cool thing about this, about Deathmate is the pairing of penciler and inker that you would normally not see, and very unique to this crossover. Like, okay, so for this first story in the prologue, you have it's written by Bob Layton, but penciled by Barry Windsor-Smith. Yes, the legendary Barry Windsor-Smith, and inked by Jim Lee. It's a great pairing, and the pairing makes sense because a lot of Lee's stuff took after kind of the hatching that Barry Windsor-Smith was doing, on things like Weapon X, that kind of horizontal hatching, that Windsor-Smith was doing on that miniseries, and really took an influence, really gave an influence to a lot of the Image guys around that time, and you started seeing Jim Lee, bring that into his penciling as well. And then Solar, the Man of the Atom, and then Void, Jim Lee's character. And a lot of this crossover, from what I've read, of these, crossover really, it's like, from what I gather, Void and Solar, they're able to cross dimensions, and they fall in love with each other somehow, and through their love, they change the reality, so it presents this alternate reality. As you can see here, they somehow they fall in love. I don't care. I love you. We are together. Oneness. Our thoughts are one. Our hearts are one. We are one. Anyway, and then so they changed the reality. Okay, and you have Rob Liefeld here. Again, Bob Layton is the writer, but Liefeld takes over as penciler. And then this is actually inked by Bob Layton, Danny Mickey, and Dan Panosian. And yeah, so you see here, as a result of the altering of the realities by the love of Dr. Solar and Void, you have Bloodshot here. You have Bloodshot crossing over with Youngblood for whatever that team is. You had the regular versions of Youngblood here as well, and they mix together to form this new version. You have this version of, who is this? Oh, Shadow Man. You have Shadow Man here. You have the Wildcats, Jim Lee's Wildcats. You have Grifter and then Zealot. And then they form a new reality here. And based on this here, this badge on Zealot's chest here, I think that was Hardcore is the name of the regular Valiant title that they took over. So I don't know. what would have been like Wildcore, which coincidentally became a book later on for, Wildstorm, featuring a lot of the Wildstorm characters, of course. Then you have Jim Lee's Voodoo and Imp, and then Hardcore here. And then they cross over to become their group. Is the group called Hardcore? No. Yeah, it is Hardcore. My bad. Yeah, it is. Hardcore, Wildcats, Wildcore, Hardcats. Hardcats? Hardcats? What? Okay. I'm glad they never went forward with that. Hard cats. Oh, brother. All right. Anyway. So then, this group, I believe this is Harbinger, the Valiant book. And then here you have, I think this is Brigade, if I'm not mistaken, from Liefeld. I think this character here is Seahawk. And I don't know the names of these two characters, but then they combine to become a team, whatever this team's name is. And then I forgot, Silvestri, gets in on the mix because at this time he was still linked with Omad Studios, so he got his characters in the mix here. So you have Turok, and there's a character I'm trying to remember. So you have Turok, the Warblade for Jim Lee's Wildcats, Exo Manowar from Valiant, and of course Ripclaw from Marc Silvestri. You have Spartan. This is another Liefeld character here. Somebody from Hardcore. I'm not sure. And then of course Badrock from Liefeld, and then Supreme from Liefeld, and then Solar as well. You can just see like this is kind of a mess going on here. They tried to make a crossover as best they could between the companies, but you can just tell like there's not going to be any narrative here. Very little. If anything, this is just going to be a showcase for each company to kind of work off each other, being like the two upstart companies, and perhaps in my opinion, Image being the bigger of the two. But yeah, so you see Liefeld here, still drawing, this part of the story. This almost looks like Kane from X-Force, that weapon, that new Weapon X that Liefeld had come up with in X-Force. And then another character, I believe from his Berserkers. Oh, okay, yeah, it says right there, Berserkers. And what's interesting is that Liefeld gave, for whatever reason, a lot of his characters that Wolverine haircut. I don't know why. Has he ever said why a lot of his characters had that Wolverine hair? Like you had this guy, you had Troll, several others. You know what I'm saying? And I just wondered about that. But anyway, hey, okay. And then Prophet, his character Prophet. And then they go off to continue to crossover in the other books as detailed here. To be continued in Deathmate Yellow, Red, Blue, and Black on sale soon. And so there you have it. There is the prologue for Deathmate. And then we get to the end of the crossover, the epilogue. And to me, this right here, this is my favorite of the books, actually. Because I've read the other books, at least I've read in black at one time. And of course but this one right here, this has some of the coolest art, of the entire crossover to me. And it is written and inked. And the editor-in-chief is Bob Layton, but penciled by Marc Silvestri. And off the bat, you got that sharp Marc Silvestri art. Look at the gestures going on here. Just solid. beautiful stuff. Look at that, man. To me, Marc Silvestri was almost like the John Buscema of Image. You know what I'm saying? If Lee was like the gold standard of what the industry was looking for at the time, then Marc Silvestri was like the best illustrator, you know, of the Image guys. And from what I've read, the Image guys will tell you so. Like, hey, it was him, and perhaps Will Spatasio, you know, but definitely, you know, Marc Silvestri. Oh, it's like this figure here. Look at this right here. Just solid. The angles that Silvestri was coming up with on this stuff is just works. Beautiful. The imagery of this here, and oh man, great face, great face. Man, the dynamism going on here. Man, look at this. Just good stuff. Wow. Great stuff, man. And the inking, you know, they were taking it to you with the inking, you know, back then. Look at that. Great figures, man. Then of course, the Silvestri women. Always loved characters, you know, in comics that had like they were defined, or the interiors of them were star fields. It puts you in the mind of like Eternity from Doctor Strange in Marvel Comics. I always loved that. That's just a great visual, you know. They have the stars, you know, embodied in the form of a person. Just think that's such a cool visual. Always works. So thus ends that first half of this epilogue. And then the last part of the epilogue is drawn by Joe Quesada and inked by Scott Williams. You know, when would you ever see this pairing? You know, Quesada and Williams. Well, you saw it here. Oh man, this is my favorite period of Quesada, that early 90s period, you know, where his work had the big eyes and that bounce to it, you know, and the cartooned figures, you know what I'm saying? And just, man, his work has so much movement to it, you know, and so much energy. That's the other thing, like the energy. And you can see this is obviously a takeoff on T2, with the T1000 forming his finger into a knife point and actually stabbing Supreme through the eye, very much like the T1000 did on a couple of occasions in Terminator 2. But yeah, man, Quesada in the early 90s, man, it just was one of the hot shots. Just could not be beat, you know, just in terms of like the energy that he had going on, man. Just I'm surprised. I've never read anywhere that, you know, Image ever approached him, you know, to do a book for them, but he was snatched up quickly, you know, by Marvel. You know, during this time in rapid succession, he was getting work from, you know, DC, because he was doing the Ray for DC, and then DC had an imprint called what was it called, Impact Comics or something like that, and he was doing work for them, like cover work and everything. Then around that same time, he was doing work for Marvel. He was doing cover work for them. A lot of cover work. Some of his Punisher covers are really good around that time. And some other things, and then he was on like some of the X books, in particular X Factor. He was doing great work over there. Helped to co-create the character of Random there, and then he was doing work for Valiant. You know, hints here. Quesada was already on Ninjak at this time. And there was the cover for number 2 with the water pouring out the mouth of the skull. Badass. That is such a great cover, man. You kidding me? And here we go again. More Quesada cover work. And he also did there was a cover that he did by, it's a chromium cover. It's a wraparound cover, as it says here. So this is only the front part of the cover, and then it wraps around to show more. And then there's more of Quesada's Ninjak. So you can see Quesada was very much the young hotshot coming along at this time. And yeah, you can see here, like, the pacing that he has here. You know, you wouldn't see a lot of young pencilers doing something like this, you know, to where they would actually take multiple panels and break down the action, you know, because a lot of the time they were focused on the big stuff, which Quesada, you know, specialized in, but to see him also take the time to pace it out, you know, basically this was rejoining the universes and trying to make everything right again. And as shown in the prologue, now we have Void and Solar coming together once again to make everything right. And that's cool. This almost shows like the influence of, say, like Alex Nino, if you will, whom I think Quesada has named as an influence, but this stuff here definitely has an Alex Nino type of influence, you know, and I love this stuff. Are you kidding me? Alex Nino is one of my favorites, so that's how I was able to pick up on that. And yeah, like the movement on this, man. Look at that. And so yes, everything is finally put back right. And I don't think it's any coincidence that everything is put back right. And then this is the Wildcats headquarters, Halo. And then in the middle of the halo is the sun, which is very much the logo, the compass logo for Valiant. You see there. Hey, that's all I got for you this time. This go around from Escape to the Quarter Bin. As always, I'm your host, Adrian Johnson. I thank each and every one of you for listening and or watching every episode of the show.